Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be taking the game Tapestry and adding a random game mechanic into it. And how we might be doing that? Well, we have on our screen over here, we have our wheel of mechanics, which this has 63 different game mechanics pulled from BGG, Board Game Geek. Where we will spin it, and that will tell us a random game mechanic that we have to add into Tapestry. And so I'll pull up the 5-minute timer on my phone. That way we have to feel the pressure, so we don't have to overthink what we're designing. And so I'm going to spin the wheel, mute my computer, and hope that we don't end up with a mechanic that's already in Tapestry. Alright, we got Dexterity as our mechanic that we are trying to put into Tapestry. So we got our tablet screen showing now. We can make sure that it's syncing correctly. Alright, we should be good to go. So I'll write Dexterity. So we're taking Dexterity and trying to insert that game mechanic into Tapestry. All right, so we will start the clock and see where we get. We are off to the races. So Dexterity. So I'm thinking that this probably makes sense to lean into the city board. There's two thoughts. We could either do a dexterity element in the city board of the, because you're taking the buildings and placing them into your city. We could go with something along those lines, or we could reimagine the tracks on the board where when you're pushing them up, potentially all the tracks are kind of within one another, so you have to try and push your cubes throughout there. And then the third thought that I had was doing something with, I'm going to block my face really quick, is if we pull up the main board of Tapestry, there's this giant center representing like the land that you're sort of exploring and discovering, that we could add a dexterity element into there that has some design space as well. And so I'd love to hear in chat if there's one of those three that intrigue you the most. But while I wait for chat's response, I think I'll start with the city dexterity portion of it. And so to switch over it back into our tablet screen to recreate our city, you got the 3x3 of the districts, which will make a thicker line to kind of denote that. It's not too much of a thicker line, but that's okay. We'll just swap to the thin line. So we got our thick line. So I sort of thought initially the city dexterity when I first saw it. All right, perfect. Michaela, we are aligned. Michaela's in the chat agreeing that we should focus on the city portion of the dexterity. So we'll draw our city really quick. And gotta work on my penmanship, but we're going fast, so we have our city, and then there are certain spots. We'll go back to our medium thickness pen line. We have our, we'll see if there's any Tapestry experts to see if they can guess which city I'm copying, or those that were perceptive in watching the video to see if they caught the title of the city that I'm recreating. And so for those of you who've never played Tapestry, there's certain spaces in your city that are like, I guess, rocks and non-buildable areas that count as already built upon. So when you're scoring for rows and columns, those already satisfy being built. And so bonus points, comment down below if you know which city I just drew. But the dexterity element is potentially you have to terraform your city before you can build on it. So at the start of the game, there would be these tiles, or some sort of tile configuration that would highlight, okay, there's a tile here and a tile here, tile here, but there'd be these kind of randomly placed either 2x2 squares or 3x2 squares that everyone would get a tiny little excavator shovel that, in order to be able to successfully build, you have to remove one of those polyomino shapes, and you would get the bonus if you can remove them successfully. Or so we would probably create some sort of benefit system of, if you can it'd be hard to do because I'm thinking sort of operation, but we don't want to add all those weird mechanics of like the buzzing and how do we know if we've unsuccessfully failed. And so if you can potentially move a tile, we'll finish that thought and then recap where we got to with this challenge. But we'd come up with like 3 case scenarios that if you can get the tile onto another piece in one action, so by like potentially taking one tile and being able to flip it over or something like that, you are able to remove it entirely, or take the bonus. Like if you're able to flip the tile and keep it within your grid, something like that, you will get the bonus points on the backside that you reveal. If you take 2 chances to like if it requires 2 attempts to actually remove the tile from your city, period, there's no penalty. But if you can't remove that like terraformed section completely in 2 attempts, then maybe you'd have to pay a resource to successfully pull the tile from your city. And so that is where we'll leave off with the brainstorm of that. But to recap, our challenge was to take dexterity as a mechanic, and so we didn't even start by saying what dexterity is. Dexterity is kind of like Jenga or other dexterity games like Animal Upon Animal. I guess Crokinole and Strike, and it's like an element, like there's a physical element to the game, and your goal is to like it's a so that's sort of what dexterity is. And our challenge was to add a dexterity element into Tapestry. We had talked about Operation being a dexterity game as well, where you're trying to use the little precision tweezers to not touch the edge. So the dexterity has a physical precision style element to the game. And what we came up with is we talked about 3 different possible areas that we think dexterity could fit between the center of the main board, the way that you get moved up on tracks, and the way that you add cities or buildings to your cities. And so those are the 3 areas that we highlighted as a potential area, room, or space for a dexterity element to exist. And we chose to go with the city mat as our location for adding dexterity. And so in the 5 minutes, we came up with this idea of having these almost polyomino shapes that start on your board, and on the board itself it would dictate where these shapes would go. And we created this rule set of that if one attempt you were successful in adding or removing the tile from the player board, you would get a bonus on whatever the back of it is if you were able to flip it off of your city. And if you did it in 2 attempts, you wouldn't get the bonus that is on the back. but you wouldn't have to pay a cost to remove that terraformed area. And then if you weren't able to do it in 2 attempts, you would have to pay 1 resource as a cost to terraform that section of your player board. And so that's kind of what we came up with in the 5 minutes. And so how we would test this is I would model up some polyomino style shapes for covering the player board. And I would go and I'd have to take the city mats to count up how many squares there are. And then I would create a unique tile set that satisfies that positioning cost. And I'd print for probably 2 of them because we'd probably be able to play it at 2 players. And so there could be a race element that the first to place all the polyominoes into their city successfully would get a bonus starting resource or something not crazy. But once those were printed, I would create a better, a prettier rule set for what the criteria is for kind of clearing out terrain. And then I would print the little dexterity shovels that we would be using to attempt to flip the terrain. And so that would be the entirety of what I'd need to kind of do before testing this idea at the table. And so how I'd go about testing it is the next time, once I had all that content printed and produced, I would ask my fiance Michaela if, hey, you want to play Tapestry? I got this interesting dexterity element that I'd like to test out. And we'd table it, and I'd probably do a recorded playthrough to be able to watch back and see what the pain points were from that dexterity element to see if it's even a fun concept, first overall. And then 2, see the pain points of knowing where to improve upon it. And so in closing, that is how I personally would add a dexterity element to Tapestry. Feel free to comment below what you think would be or if you have any ideas of a dexterity element in Tapestry. I'd love to hear them in the comments below. And if you like content like this, please feel free to subscribe. Hope to hear from you soon.